Hi friends, today I want to talk about J K Rowling. It's not really a secret anymore to most people that J K Rowling has some really damaging opinions that she is very happy to bandy about on her Twitter, and when she does, there's no small amount of people in her comments, quote retweeting her, calling out her pseudoscientific bull mess for what it is. It's hard to talk about J K Rowling in this context as a public figure, as an author, given how she's really in a new territory for what it means to be in control of her work and be a living author. I wanted to make a new type of video on this from what I've seen, primarily wanting to be divergent from Lindsay Ellis's very, very good video about J K Rowling, Death of the Author. I will be saying negative things about the work. I will be taking the more verbose problems with the fiction that she's created and using those as examples for the argument. So consider this a bit of a content warning if you are uninterested in retreading the same paths of, her gross examples of werewolves and goblins. Maybe take a pass on this one. If you feel especially keen on the concept of a fandom, I would likewise offer maybe sit this one out. However, if you're curious about how I wrap up Harry Potter, J K Rowling, and fandom, and what it means to stop forgiving her, since I think a lot of people are already just like, yeah, why are we listening to her? We don't listen to her anymore. That's not true. We're going to talk about why. Coming right up. Let's start off with the obvious. J K Rowling is the author of Harry Potter, which at current is 7 core books, plus supplemental materials. There's a script in novel format. Obviously, there's a play to go with that. Obviously. There's also the Grindelwald movies, which are an ongoing series. So 10 movies. It's a lot. And Rowling has done a lot of work to make sure that her brand is associated with her. It isn't strange to have a brand associated with the author. You have the Discworld series, obviously by Terry Pratchett, J.R.R. Tolkien with the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit books. Rowling, however, has done an inordinate amount of work to make sure that the Harry Potter brand is hers to control. When you consider that she was the sole author of these books that did very well on their own, causing them to be adapted into films in which she did not give up control of casting or most executive power over plot. She was able to hold on to her brand much more thoroughly than most other authors have come before. Especially if we, only count the ones where adaptations were created within the lifetime of the author who created the original books. It's interesting when we think about other major properties that are oftentimes compared to Harry Potter due to their cultural influence, like Star Wars, which was once a Lucas thing, but is now safely within Disney territory. We can consider Dune with Frank Herbert, who died while working on the last book. This isn't just control as an author. As I've mentioned, she had virtually veto control over many aspects of the films, including but not limited to casting and which scenes needed to be filmed in the first place, let alone the editing process of putting it all together. She wrote The Cursed Child, which reads like an insane fan fiction of the Harry Potter universe and violates rules and past events set by the original books. All this to say, we cannot separate J K Rowling from the fiction she created. From the books, to movies, to a play, and a theme park, even, in which case she had control over. Jenny Nicholson has a fun little bit about that. They are tied together. They are one and the same, and we cannot, in full honesty, practice death of the author when talking about Harry Potter. It's just not a realistic thing we can achieve. She has 14.2 million followers on Twitter. Her movies do insanely well, and her books usually fly off the shelves. It's really interesting to think about the brand and the author in conjunction when you acknowledge that Crimes of Grindelwald is the worst performing film out of all of them, the lowest rated. You can find no small amount of YouTubers just dragging it. And it still made more than double its investment back at the box office. Death of the author is not a viable strategy when the author is making active revisions to their work while standing on a soapbox in a public square, even if it is virtual. This author also spouts hateful and damaging rhetoric to millions of people across the world. We can't just ignore that. And the author has made it impossible to separate that from the work that she has made before that many of us enjoyed in the past. This is harder than accepting the Lord of the Rings books and movies for what they are while acknowledging that Tolkien was absolutely grossly racist and had some not super cool beliefs about different people and different systems in the world. That guy's been dead for a very long time, and the movies were made in absence of a lot of the damaging ideas that he had. Rowling refuses to let that sort of thing transpire. You know, she'll go on Twitter and actively tweet revisions to her own work, such as, by the way, Dumbledore is gay. Yeah, that's not good. This Death of the Author discussion I find really interesting as well, because a lot of people want to drag H.P. Lovecraft now, which I find really funny, because it's so popular. People just make up weird excuses about some of his more popular fiction. One I heard recently being that Shadow over Innsmouth was actually about him finding out that he's Welsh, and I could not find a single source to corroborate that. I actually tracked down the person I heard this from, and they told me that they heard about it in some podcast. Again, it's just really popular to drag him, and he can't defend himself, so he can't make that hole worse. J K Rowling can, though. The author is not only very much alive, but refuses to wrest the works from herself. Part of the problem of the Death of the Author discussion is not every fan, not every enjoyer of the work is on the same page. I enjoyed her books growing up. I didn't care for the movies. And about the time she finished her written series, I had already moved on to authors that I considered either more talented or more engaging. Or I didn't really have time to read that much either. I don't know. High school was complicated. But not everyone stopped reading her stuff and then just didn't engage until it became a requirement, as with Twitter popping up and her having bad takes that circulate on all forms of social media and infiltrates YouTube with people who want to talk about whether or not it's good or bad that she's gender critical now. See, there's people who are going to enjoy her books, enjoy her movies, think that Harry Potter is just a pure fun adventure. And they're going to be completely removed from the more disgusting things she says, which makes cancel culture sound like a thing, that she'll say one thing that some people just won't like, and they'll suddenly decide, you know what? Maybe we should just silence her somehow. And these people who don't know the larger context will just be like, hey, that's not cool. What did she do to you? It's challenging because we're not all on the same page. We're not all privy to the same information. Hell, I'm not even privy to the same information. I'm working from more of a backseat perspective, someone who moved away from her and thought that when I reread her books when I was first entering college before I dropped out and then came back, I was really dissatisfied with a few things that I had found. Around this time, she started to get relevant online and brought to light other things that I thought were pretty challenging, pretty not fun in her works. And ever since then, I've tried to just be distanced. But within the last couple of years, now that she's taken an active role in trying to criminalize the concept of being transgender, I don't know. It's kind of hard to want to be removed when someone is actively causing harm. You know, I can't do that. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I read the first 3 books when I was in elementary school. One of my friends had found the books to be really interesting. We went to the Scholastic Book Fair, and my mother picked them up for me, and I read them all in like 2 weeks. Which I would argue is pretty quick for a 3rd grader. But, you know, whatever. Y'all can fling hate in the comments. My mother was so impressed that she promised to buy me each of the new books the day they hit shelves if I continued to read like I had, which was awesome. You know, I got book 4, first edition hardcover, book 5, first edition hardcover, book 6 I had to wait a week to get because she wasn't quick enough. That's fine. I don't blame you, Mom. I love you. And then book 7 she got me. And book 7 took me a while to read. I won't lie. This was right around the time that I stopped being so interested. It would be inaccurate. It would even probably be a bit of a lie for me to say that my interest in reading and what I enjoy reading was not partially inspired by reading the Harry Potter books growing up. They presented a story that I could engage with, a story that I could read and just lose myself in. Other books had done this as well, but Harry Potter is among the ones that I had on my shelf to just return to and enjoy. And even though I grew up to start experiencing and appreciating others, I mean, you can see H.P. Lovecraft over here, there's Akira, there's some Dune over here. I mean, I've moved on, but partially I have to owe some of my early scholastic education, my interest in reading fiction, to Harry Potter. I'm going to tell you guys my original, most divisive opinion on Harry Potter back when I was in high school. I thought Order of the Phoenix was one of the worst books I have ever written, that Harry read to me like a spoiled child who couldn't conceptualize the idea that someone might not be dedicated 100% of their effort to paying attention to him, especially after he had already been given a perfect invisibility cloak. He had inherited a massive fortune from his parents. Someone, we all know who, bought him an amazing broom his first year in Hogwarts. He's a spoiled child. Then I read The Half-Blood Prince. I thought it was rather interesting. We got more to the actual fantasy elements that I thought were really interesting. And it was also not an extra 100 or so pages of Harry bitching to himself. That was really neat. And then the 7th book came out and we're right back to the same characterization as Order of the Phoenix. And a whole bunch of not solving the problem of Voldemort being back. That was my most divisive opinion. Now my most divisive opinion is J K Rowling is a bit of a hack. There was a point to that rambling. And the point was, even though I had become aware of the issues in her writing in the later books, her earlier books are not devoid of these same issues. I was 9 years old when I read the first 2 books. I was not the media scholar I am well over several hundred novels later. The first couple of books were intriguing to me, and they were thought-provoking, and they were fun adventures through a magical castle. The problem is they don't really hold up to much scrutiny now. I want to go on another quick tangent. Usually when there's something popular in culture, we take a baby in bathwater approach to accepting or rejecting. We'll say, for the example of maybe Chick-fil-A sandwiches, we know that they pay money to groups, to charities that are anti-trans, anti-gay, all that gross stuff. And a lot of people will say, I've had their sandwiches and they're not actually that good, so I don't mind not paying them. Which is an interesting thing to say, because it implies that you have to dislike the primary product in order to accept that the provider of said product is harmful. It's perfectly acceptable to say, I like their sandwiches, but what they do as a company is abhorrent, and I do not mind not eating their sandwiches so long as they continue hurting people. It's important. Actually, Anita Sarkeesian said it best like 10 years ago, whenever this Gamergate shit happened, where she would say, it's okay to appreciate media and things that we like, but we should still be aware of the more problematic areas. Slight rephrase. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the parts of Harry Potter that don't suck. We should just be aware of the parts that do suck and maybe not pretend like they aren't a problem in the first place. You know, it's not uncommon that someone will say, I grew up with Harry Potter, I thought it was really fun and enjoyable, and therefore I should still continue to enjoy it. Which is maybe slightly confusing, given my example was literally the exact opposite, but horseshoe theory It's a mirror. Move on and accept it. We'll be fine. It works. It worked. Back to the death of the author part of this discussion. Some people are happy to call Harry Potter as a universe, as a series of books and movies, somehow pure, so long as we remove Rowling from the discussion. That the more problematic things that she put in the books are less so, or absent those problems, if we just don't bring up how she complicated the issues. We can go back a few minutes in the video and examine why it's physically impossible to remove her from the equation because she is the brand, but it also implies that at some point in Joanne's career, she didn't hold toxic and disgusting and harmful beliefs. Rather, she adopted those over time. And if we examine the earlier works, that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. I'm not going to turn this into a Harry Potter bad video, as much fun as that would be, but we do need to talk about the actual issues with the fiction. I'm not going to talk about literally every single issue, but I do want to bring up a couple of really core, really concise examples in order to make my argument. I think the easiest of the examples to pick from are her depiction of goblins. In Rowling's world, the goblins run the banks. They mint the coins that the wizards use to pay for stuff. They also speak a foreign language called gobbledygook, which kind of sounds cute to a kid, but has some other pretty gross connotations, especially when we acknowledge that she has described them as having hooked nose, long, bony fingers and toes. And then you realize that they're stand-ins for Jewish people. This is complicated by how secretive the goblins are, how they don't allow other people into their groups. Popular anti-Semitic talking point from Nazis and neo-Nazis alike. They're also greedy, apparently. And in the movie, which Rowling had executive veto power over for much of it, you can find a Star of David in the tile work when Harry enters Gringotts. Yeah. We won't be able to avoid, assuming this video gets any sort of traction, people saying, however, J K Rowling has expressed solidarity with Jewish people, and obviously this is non-reflective. That's, again, part of the problem of Death of the Author. She can make her work say one thing and then go on Twitter and say something completely opposite, and now suddenly we're in this area where we don't know what is right. Except I'm here to say that with the work that's actually making her money, with the books that made her popular and famous in the first place, this is what we must look to for her core beliefs. Anyone can go on Twitter and say, I didn't mean what I said. Hell, demagogues on YouTube and their own little podcasts do it all the time. I almost want to just put up some of Tim Pool saying something really stupid and then a week later saying, oh, I didn't mean that. No, I didn't mean that. And with the election having just wrapped up, there's not a small amount of it. Hell, you probably already know what I'm talking about. I'm just going to move on. Why don't we try the next example that's gotten Rowling a little bit of hate? And that is that she's probably homophobic. At least a little. She said homophobic things, and you know, I'm willing to make that distinction for at least the sake of this video. But her werewolves are older men who prey on young men and bite them and give them an incurable disease that they're forced to live with for their whole lives. Like a stand-in for the AIDS crisis. Because that's cool. The worst part is, you know, she did that whole 7th book where people thought it might be clearly delineated that it's time we actually make Dumbledore like gay with a capital G and stop dancing around what his past was like. And then we don't get that. Then she goes to Twitter to say, by the way, Dumbledore's actually gay. And then she did the Grindelwald movie where it was supposed to be even more explicit because we would see it with our eyes with 2 actors demonstrating that they are close to one another in a romantic way, and then it turns into a brotherly love connection, which is worse than what we were offered. The worst part is, because she keeps not doing what she says she's going to do, if the next movie has explicit man-on-man action, we won't be able to tell if it's because she actually wanted to depict the characters as gay this time, or if she finally learned that pretending and paying lip service to gay people, but not actually including gay people in her fiction, in her works, in the things that she sells to make money, that line is indistinguishable. We will be unable to tell whether or not she's actually learned from her actions, or if her pocket has learned from her actions. I was actually recently reminded of this one because in a Discord that I'm in, someone wanted to talk about whether or not Rowling causes harm, and I wanted to go with a really fun one to talk about what her internal beliefs must be. And you know, I gave the goblins and the werewolves really quickly, and then I wanted to express that Rowling has different weird opinions on how the wizarding world works, and that is that they're all completely fine with slavery. And when the muggle-born child Hermione learns about this, she's like, wow, that's really messed up, you know? Slavery was kind of a problem we had to deal with, and I don't think it's cool that the house elves are slaves, but the house elves are totally fine with it, which reads like some sort of weird conservative wet dream over here, you know? I'm gonna stop chasing that one because we get into weird problematic issues, like why didn't the wizards stop Hitler, which is something the Grindelwald movies have to grapple with. But also, Rowling, being the creator of the work, names the group Spew, which tells the audience to not take Hermione seriously either. And even her one friend who knows that slavery was a real problem for real humans, Harry, just lets her take the full brunt of the damage. What the fuck? There's even more garbage in her books, and this is going to be the last assumption-based thing that we see in her books. But all of the main characters are white. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Dumbledore, all of the professors that ever really matter are white. We can talk about how Cho Chang, her name basically just sounds like a slur. There's two girls of Indian descent in a school in Britain where there's a lot of people from India in Britain. It's a problem. It's weird that there's so few characters of color who do literally anything important to the story. All right, moving on from issue-based critique, I just want to talk about her ability as a writer for a quick second. Her prophecy was so bad that as the stories went on, she effectively wrote a second character who could have lived to fulfill it. And had it been Neville to overturn, you know, everything that happened, it would mean that Dumbledore was wrong and ruined an innocent life in his efforts to try and make a prophecy come true. It would almost be as interesting as the overarching plot of the prequel movies in Star Wars, which are actually really clever in what they decided to do, even with some of the dumber stuff that happens in them. It doesn't help that her later books have a lot of meandering nonsense that just isn't applicable to the story. You could argue and say that these are helping build the world just the same way the earlier books did, but the earlier books didn't have nearly as concise of plot in them. You know, it was, ooh, look at this magic school. What's in here? Let's do some Scooby-Doo Hardy Boys adventure in it. But when she decided to give it an actual plot, the concept of just meandering, treading water, and seeing a couple of new things in the wizarding world every other page slows it down and turns it into a slog. It makes it an unfocused mess rather than a story that you would want to read. We can also talk about how her ability to create these stories has gotten clumsier as the stories have gone on. as mentioned earlier, The Cursed Child was a mess. It's complete nonsense. And the Grindelwald Fantastic Beasts movies, I have no words. You know, they're named after one of the textbooks in the Harry Potter universe, and we barely get any of that. You know, there's Newt, who has cool animals, I guess, but then he's suddenly flung into this other wizard Hitler character plot. I don't get it. There were ways to do this, and she said, no, let's do it this dumb, overly contrived, terrible way instead. There's more we can say about her ability as a writer, as someone who writes stories, and her ability to convey what she is writing. I think those examples will suffice to say she is not very skilled as a writer. Most of what she has written is derivative and sloppy, and you can get almost anything infinitely better by reading another author who cares a little bit more about the craft, who understands the messages they put into their work and how it can be conveyed. There was that really funny tweet by Ursula K. Le Guin a little bit ago, which is like, she basically explained that the books are fun, but she couldn't understand why she had acclaimed any sort of popularity due to her ability to write, which I find absolutely amazing, because Ursula K. Le Guin is one of the most capable writers who has exceptionally thought-provoking stories. Yeah. Crystallizing moment right there. However, I hope this has made evident that it's not a problem that we enjoyed Harry Potter media while we were kids, while we were growing up, while we were learning what to look for in stories. The problem is now we should accept that those stories have baggage. They have messages that aren't completely innocent or pure as people would want us to believe. I hope it is also made more clear by her own actions publishing an anti-trans, pro-TERF propaganda book that's just nothing but misunderstandings of the entire complicated, an issue that's ordinarily uncomplicated, but she and her fans have made complicated, as just a simple social issue of accepting trans people for who they are. There's another problem here that we need to talk about that I don't see come up enough when we discuss fictional works and how we enjoy them, and that is fandoms. I personally believe that fandoms are generally not a positive force. I'm going to try and leave my own personal biases out of this part of the discussion. As a result, I'm trying to keep it short and concise, but I do want my cards on the table so that if anyone watches this, there's no ambiguity about what I truly believe as a person, but I'm trying to do this discussion honesty in giving you that information. The reason why I need to talk about fandoms in this discussion, and why I find it a bit of a disservice that other people haven't discussed fandoms, at least not to a large extent. To be fair, I'm not going to go down this road too long. The problem is that a fandom is a community of people who come together because they enjoy some form of media. Maybe it's a book series, maybe it's a TV series, maybe it's this expanded fictional concept like the Omegaverse, which has been important to the cultural zeitgeist recently. Go watch videos on that. But the problem is this community comes together out of mutual love or appreciation for a series, which creates an insulating factor against forces that would want to talk about these things critically. I've seen people say that fandoms can be critical of their work, and that when they are, can be incredibly constructive. I have not personally seen that. I do not believe this to be necessarily accurate of all fandoms, or the Harry Potter one specifically. Most of the discussion around this is telling other people to hush up and enjoy the work as it is, to try and find excuses for the author, or find excuses for the work, or to find places in the work that can explain away problems created by the author or by later works. One reason I really feel like this is worth talking about right now, it's a little hard because I drafted this script a little bit ago, back when Rowling was relevant again, but there's that new Harry Potter game, and there was an ongoing discussion with the fandom about whether or not we buy this video game knowing that we do not want to support J K Rowling, but we do not want to disenfranchise workers who were drafted to make a video game for her. And this discussion was really, really stupid. There was a rather famous tweet. I don't have it here. I'm going to put it in the comments or the description of the video when I have chance, about how paying for a video game to be made works. It is not post facto. They are either paid upfront or they are given a contract, as per contracted workers, that outlines how they will be paid as time goes on. And yet there were people who were saying, do we buy this video game to support the people who programmed it? And the answer to that is, yes, if you want. Under capitalism, no one must tell you what to purchase. You know, the core idea is you buy what you want, you vote with your dollar. We obviously know how that does not work in reality land. Just because you feel bad that someone was obligated to make this Harry Potter game doesn't mean you have to pay them for it, especially since most of that money is going to go straight to Rowling herself. This is a nonsense discussion, and it went on way longer than it should have. I still know people to this day who bought that game under the guise of supporting the creators. I also know that people argued with them for days about how this is a non-issue, about how it is so incredibly obvious that you could just buy this game secondhand. You can go pay your local used video game retailer. Don't even go to GameStop if you don't like GameStop. If you live near a major city, there are going to be secondhand stores that you can go to. And yet this was still somehow an issue. The long and short of it is, when it comes to fandoms, because J K Rowling has tied herself so concretely to her product, any discussion of her product must necessarily include her and her work and what she does outside of it. These are tied so incredibly hard together. Some sort of Ouroboros of Gordian knots. In her efforts to maintain control while publishing such damaging material and saying such toxic rhetoric, only brings more attention to her own work. As she continues these bad takes, she draws more scrutiny to the work that she would rather be seen as its own thing. Some sort of gross monkey paw of being famous and being edgy. Because of how she talks about these issues, how she refuses to allow any part of her brand be removed from her, we are given a very clear picture of what she actually believes. When we look at the Harry Potter world and we see the gross things that are in there, we must understand that these are her core beliefs on some level. If they weren't, she could just let them go. If it was for the purpose of story, she could say, yes, this is part of the story. I, however, believe that gay people are great, and in the next book, I will make sure that there is accurate representation, and I will work with people to make sure that the representation is fulfilling and honest. And that's not what we get. Instead, we get gender-critical turfism. I'm not going to belabor this point because there are people far more qualified to talk about this issue than me. I am simply someone who is aware of these issues, aware of the science, aware of the discourse, and believe that these are things that should be accurately depicted and honestly discussed. And people like Rowling refuse to engage honestly. She is incredibly ignorant on this topic, but bandies about her intellect and her ability to think critically on these issues as some sort of ethos appeal, some way of demonstrating that she is credible about this. And while it is accurate, we have terms like man and woman and male and female, and this can be a little hard to navigate for someone who is unaware of how trans issues and gender positive stuff is currently being discussed. And we are having a discussion right now about whether or not we need concrete terms to refer to genetic expression. Simply stating that a trans woman is a man, it's it's not a good look. It's not honest, it's not accurate, and you'll not find a single scientist who's willing to back you on this issue. The problem with sex and gender is that they are not the same thing. And while there's a little bit of overlap in what it means to have a sexual identity versus a gender identity, they are different. There's a reason why we can say a straight man or a straight woman or a lesbian woman. These are two different things that we say at the same time. And while you might be a little bit old-fashioned and say gay means two men, lesbian means two women, there's plenty of people who have just reclaimed the term gay to just mean same sex, which is, I think, fun. That's just cute. But more to the point, we express the gender and then orientation. And you could say orientation. I don't care about the order, but these are two different things. And someone's ability to identify gender comes from a social context. What does gender mean in society, and how do they identify with that? Sexual identity is similar, but not as similar, because we generally agree on sexual identity. It's gender identity where people are really hung up. Just like we were like 40 years ago with whether or not it's okay to be gay. Oh, sorry, I said 40, like 4 years ago, about whether or not it was okay to be gay. People like J K Rowling are not interested in having an honest discussion about gender identity or what transgender actually means. If she was interested, she would listen to the people on Twitter who she quote retweets and then makes fun of, or the people that she says are persecuting her or canceling her by simply stating science, by giving her links to academic articles, to actual studies, to actual clinicians who look at this stuff and critically evaluate what it means and try and make it easier for transgendered people to exist in society. If she was interested, she would do any one of those things. If she was serious, she would do all of those things, and she does none. That's what's the main takeaway here is. On her current bent of being gender critical, she is actually being incredibly transphobic and refuses to engage with any sort of media that could, in any way, shape, or form, be contentious to her own ideals. My original script called for looking at things that she has said directly, and I think in hindsight, I'm going to leave it out. I'm aware of how some of these issues can come off to trans people who might be a little bit more vulnerable, people who are not as interested as expending their energy describing that they exist and they have a right to exist. And there's plenty of people more qualified than me to talk on this. There are trans people who are perfectly able to talk on this. Not to say that I'm not allowed to comment on, I don't want to get into any of that, but this is an issue that other people have done a better job on. J K Rowling does not care about these issues. She cares about being right with her internal biases. She cares about being correct or seen as correct with her own prejudice. And the biggest problem with J K Rowling right now is she provides a gateway for people who are either unaware of their biases, their unconscious biases, or already have some form of ignorance and are looking for justification to steel them against people who are trans. They can do the same thing with homophobia. They can do the same thing with racism. They can do the same thing with anti-Semitism. And Rowling allows them to have that. She provides a shield, an invisibility cloak, if you will, for people to have these beliefs, to foster these beliefs, and face zero repercussions for it. And when people do face repercussions, people get upset. And I hope that I've described in this video why it's justifiably so. Stop excusing the bigotry that J K Rowling puts into the world and read another goddamn book. Hey, thank you everyone for checking out another one of my videos. I greatly appreciate it. I know I'm a little behind the last time Rowling did something really dumb on Twitter, but enough people are still mad about that turf book that I think this one's all right timing wise. I want to say a big thank you to my editor, Austin Wilson, and my patrons, Nick James and Aaron Bray. You two are awesome. I also want to say thank you to all my recent viewers and subs. You guys have done awesome getting my watch hours up and everything. I really, really appreciate it. If you're interested in having your name read aloud or in the credit section of my long form videos, please check out my Patreon. Link will be in the description of the video. I have a couple of things on there, including outtakes. You can view my videos early. I occasionally will ask for input or ideas on how to move my videos along. Plus, there's also a exclusive Discord where we just kind of hang out and talk about whatever. Yeah. Also, I would ask that maybe you check out my Twitch. I stream twice a week on Wednesdays and either Sunday or Saturday, whichever one is easiest, because, you know, weekends are weekends. I also have a Twitter. Maybe check that out. I occasionally say fun stuff, get into arguments, blah, 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 blah. As usual, do the YouTube things. Like, comment, subscribe. Everything helps us out, especially if you enjoy our content or if you hate our content. Appreciate it either way. Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day or night, wherever you are, whatever time it is. Enjoy yourself.